Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today we're going to be talking about the weirdest movies currently included with Netflix. So this is going to be a list of 20 really weird movies, but they're all good recommendations. However, they are weird. A lot of these are not going to be for everybody, but odds are there are going to be a few on here at least that you haven't seen that are going to be for you, so pay attention closely to my descriptions. Also, this list does not include some really great but really weird movies on Netflix that I have talked about too many times. Movies like Horns and The Killing of a Sacred Deer. I will, however, put links to some of those older videos in the top pinned comment below, along with the full list of all 20 movies that I talk about in this video. Again, that's in the top pinned comment down below. But starting this list all the way at the back at number 20, in a list full of weird movies, winner of the weirdest title has got to go to I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, which is an appropriate title because it's an equally weird, quirky movie. In this movie, Melanie Lynskey and Elijah Wood team up to sort of exact revenge on society, I guess sort of indirectly. Imagine if Napoleon Dynamite grew up and held a grudge against society. That's who Elijah Wood plays in this movie, and he plays it pretty damn well in my opinion. This is one of the more accessible ones on this list. However, the structure and pace of it is a little odd. But ultimately, this is a great little dark comedy that is extremely dry. If you don't like dry humor, you're gonna wanna look elsewhere on the list. But if you do, this one might be right up your alley. It does have some dark elements to it, but it's not overly brooding and is not necessarily gonna put you in a terrible mood. If you remember Jim Henson's The Storyteller and liked it, then you might really enjoy Irrimantari, The Blacksmith and the Devil, even though this does come across more as an elaborate stage play than a typical movie. This movie also features some fantastic practical effects and costuming, and overall has a very unique look to it. It reminded me a lot of Jim Henson's The Storyteller, only more polished and up to date, and ultimately it's a fairly simple sort of fable, fairy tale type thing. It was originally foreign language, but it is dubbed in English quite well. In fact, there is quite a bit of narration that goes along with this, so you're not even gonna notice the dubbing too badly in this movie. If it sounds the least bit interesting to you, it is a cool flick, but do keep in mind, it is towards the back of this list. Speaking of stage plays, my next pick is as close as you can really get to a play, yet it still does have some really nice little filmmaker touches throughout, and that's the Netflix original Malcolm and Marie. This movie stars Zendaya and John David Washington, and only Zendaya and John David Washington, as a couple who are essentially having an argument for an hour and a half. If that sounds like something you do not want to watch, you're probably not going to dig the movie. However, if you're not completely turned off by the basic concept, the delivery here is quite good. Not only that, John David Washington is one of my new favorite actors. I've liked him in everything I've seen him in so far, but his performance here is something else. He's doing a lot more work here. Zendaya's great too, but I see a lot more coming from John David Washington in this movie than I have in others. And ultimately, it is as simple as it sounds, but some of the dialogue comes across really well. There's a whole scene in the beginning where he's talking about the filmmaking industry, and I find it all really fascinating. However, still very dry. You are gonna feel a little exhausted. I actually had to watch this in 2 different sittings because it is 2 people arguing at each other for a really long time. Again though, with that simple concept in mind, it's delivered really well and ultimately does come around to something. I don't want to say where it's going, but it ultimately does go somewhere. However, if you find you typically do not like movies like this one's not going to be for you. I'm not going to push people to watch it, but if you do find the way I've described it interesting, then this may be a nice change of pace for you. So now we're going to switch gears in a big way. I've always been a fan of Danny McBride since I first saw him in Pineapple Express years ago. I love everything the guy does, but easily his weirdest movie has got to be Your Highness. Now this is kind of like a mix between The Princess Bride and Pineapple Express. Unfortunately, it's not really as good as either, which is why it is where it is on this list, but it still is pretty damn funny. It's essentially your typical stoner comedy, except it's set in this fantasy world, which is funny. The concept is funny, the characters are funny. The story and the way that this thing's glued together is pretty shaky at best though. It doesn't quite work for me. However, if you do like all of the ingredients, the people that are in it, the concept, the type of humor, it is a good watch. It's just not a very good movie. And then speaking of The Princess Bride, my next pick also stars a young Fred Savage, but this time Howie Mandel is hiding under his bed. Yes, that Howie Mandel. Except in this movie, Howie Mandel plays a monster. It'd be super creepy if it was just Howie Mandel. What were you thinking? This movie is from 1989, and you can tell when you watch it. It has that dated feel to it, which is great for some folks. This is a fun family movie. It is going to be a little too scary for very young kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I'm not going to be watching movies about monsters under the bed with them anytime soon, because bedtime is enough of an ordeal. But if your kids are a little older, this could be a fantastic nostalgic watch. While it doesn't totally hold up and was never really that great of a movie to begin with, it is a good kids movie. I mean, kids are gonna love it. Odds are most of us were pretty young when this movie came out. I remember loving it, and I do look forward to watching stuff like this with my kids when they get a little bit older. One of the better and weirder sort of hidden gem, lesser known movies to hit Netflix recently is The Block Island Sound. This is kind of a Lovecraftian mystery movie. I don't want to say too much more than that. It was done on a fairly low budget, but it works really well. There's some really dramatic performances. But above that, just an incredibly creepy vibe that goes throughout. And the filmmakers here mix things up a little bit. There's a little bit of humor, but not too much. It's just enough to sort of break some of the brooding tension that this movie has, because it does have that in spades. You're not gonna ever get hit over the head with big, wild, dazzling visuals. I mean, we're not talking about Inception here. We're talking about just a small, weird movie where really strange things start happening on an island. And while this is dark and grim, it's not overly so. Like, I wouldn't warn people before watching this one like I would some of the other ones on this list. It's fairly accessible, especially if you're interested in sort of the description of a Lovecraftian mystery. Definitely check out The Block Island Sound. The Big Lebowski is one of my favorite comedies of all time, and while it is on Netflix, I didn't see much point in including it on this list and wasting time talking about a movie we've all seen a dozen times. However, one of the Coen brothers' more recent comedies, while I didn't love it, it still is a fun watch, and it makes this list because it features some of Hollywood's biggest stars in some of their weirdest roles, and that movie is Hail Caesar. And by big stars, I'm talking about George Clooney, Josh Brolin, Scarlett Johansson, Jonah Hill, Ralph Fiennes. The list goes on with this movie, and everybody does a great job. They've all got these weird, quirky characters. The production design is beautiful. I love this era, and even though it's not quite historically accurate in this movie, it's done in a way to sort of glorify sort of this golden age of Hollywood. It's beautiful stuff. And then it's funny too. However, I do not think the story is glued together very well at all. It's not one of the Coen brothers' better comedies, but it's still entertaining in a really weird sort of fun way. So if you like classic Hollywood stuff, this is gonna be a great watch for you, even if you're not necessarily into the Coen brothers. One of the newest original sci-fi movies to hit Netflix is called Oxygen. In this movie, Melanie Laurent, who most of you will recognize from Inglourious Basterds, wakes up in some sort of weird medical chamber and has to figure out how to get out. This reminded me a lot of a movie called Buried with Ryan Reynolds, where he spends the entire movie inside of a coffin. However, I found Oxygen to work even better because there's a lot more going on. There's this computer that can talk to her, and it's ultimately a mystery. She's trying to figure out who she is, why she's in this box. That's all you really need to know going into this one. If that concept interests you, this movie really delivers. It's fantastic. However, if you feel like that's somewhat limiting, and it is, I don't know that there's enough in this movie to really warrant me pushing people to watch it who aren't inherently interested in it. That said, I thought it was really well done given the simplicity of the concept, well directed, well acted. This is a French language movie, but again, the dubbing is quite good with this one if you don't like watching movies with subtitles. The dubbing on these new Netflix originals is far superior to probably anything you've heard in the past. They've done a great job of matching the original performance as much as possible. I mean, there's limitations limitations to that, but it's better than it used to be. One of the newest sort of major releases on this list was unfortunately released right in the middle of the pandemic in theaters, and so it got far fewer eyeballs than it deserved. Yet now that it's on Netflix, it did spend a little bit of time in the #1 spot, and that is Synchronic. Now, I actually did a full review on this where I also interviewed the filmmakers, Moorhead and Benson, who are most famous for movies like The Endless, Resolution, and Spring. This is their biggest budget movie to date, and it shows. They've got bigger stars in it, it's got a more polished look than some of their other movies, and the basic setup for this is there is a new drug on the street called Synchronic that is a hallucinogen, maybe not. Anthony Mackie plays a paramedic who starts to discover some weird happenings and begins to figure out that there's something really weird going on. So out of just basic concepts on this list, this one is one of the best. Even though it was their biggest budget movie to date, it still is a fairly small movie, and I think the scope of what they were trying to do here maybe exceeded the budget a little bit, but that's still kind of cool. They were really going for this grand idea in a small movie, and the story does work. Synchronic just would have been a much cooler movie with more money and kind of more happening on screen because the concept is so interesting. Savages might be my favorite or only real Oliver Stone movie that I like from the 21st century, and it's easily the least weird movie on this list, but it is weird enough that it caused some polarization among critics back when it was released. This one does feature a weird pace and structure, however, you've got some incredible performances and just sort of a raw masculinity to this movie. It's about a couple of guys who decide to take on a cartel, and as kind of dumb as that sounds, the movie makes it work. You kind of understand not only why they're doing it, but their capability of going after some of these guys. Benicio del Toro plays a real bad motherfucker in this movie, but even more so than him is Salma Hayek. I mentioned how kind of masculine this movie is. Salma Hayek is the villain in this movie, and she absolutely kills it. She brings something to that role that I think a lot of people would not have. If you can't tell, I'm a fan of hers. And while this isn't my favorite movie of hers or favorite role, it's one of the more interesting ones that she's done in the past 10 years or so. I really did dig it. It's also one of the better movies I've seen John Travolta in the last 10 years or so. I can't think of anything I really liked him in, but this one, not only did I like him, I liked everybody in it. Blake Lively is smoking hot in this movie when she's not tied up to a chair and bleeding from her face. Cool stuff, and just weird enough to squeeze onto this list. So I'm recording and posting this video in July of 2021, where most of you are watching it, but a lot of you are watching it in the future. All of these movies might not be available on Netflix anymore, or maybe you're in a different country and you don't have access to all of these. You can still access them using a VPN service, and today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN, is the best VPN service for accessing Netflix and other streaming services. While Netflix and other streaming services do block the use of VPNs, CyberGhost has specialized servers tailored to Netflix in a variety of countries, and they've done the same thing for Prime Video, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO. Use the link in the description below or the top pinned comment, and you can pay as low as $2.19 a month to protect your web browse and keep it secure with a VPN, and access way more movies and shows than you have access to now. CyberGhost is super easy to use, and they have a 45-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk. Plus, they have great 24/7 customer support, so they're going to be there to help you set it up on different devices. Speaking of devices, you can use it on up to 7 different devices at the same time, and it's all the different types of devices you use. So go to the link in the description, pay as low as $2.19 a month, and access way more content than you have access to now. But let's go ahead and move on with the rest of this list. The Artist won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and while I think it's far from the best movie of that year, it still is a really entertaining watch, and it does a fantastic job of bringing a classic silent film structure to a modern audience. If you've never watched a silent film, they're a ton of fun to watch. They're very different from anything that you would normally watch, and the artist does a fantastic job of bridging that gap. It does enough things story-wise and structure-wise that audiences are used to today to keep things moving and keep you engaged. However, you hear nothing in this movie, with maybe one or two exceptions, because what happens in every single movie is when people are talking, all that's happening is you're getting information. In this movie, all the information is given to you visually, and it all works. You can understand the entire story without hearing a single word. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. It's sort of this relic, so I kind of understand why it won Best Picture, even though there were clearly better movies that came out this year. If you're hard up for things to watch, this is a fun, different type of movie watching experience. So far and away, weirdest movie on this list, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, is easily the weirdest movie of 2020 and one of the weirdest movies of the 21st century so far. This is written and directed by Charlie Kaufman, who's most famous for writing movies like Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. However, he's only directed one other movie, which was fairly inaccessible for most people, and this one is more so, but it is a weird, psychedelic trip of a movie. I don't want to say too much as to where this one goes. For most people, this will seem a little slow getting in. It's going to take about 20 minutes or so, but then weird things start happening and they do not let up, and this is a perfect example of a movie that is going to be too weird for a lot of people watching. However, if you hear too weird for a lot of people watching and your ears prick up and you think that might be for you, this one might be, but fair warning, it's super bizarre, but what I find so interesting about it is that it manages to work. Charlie Kaufman managed to do some really bizarre, off-the-wall things that should not work in a movie because they're so unusual. It's kind of a Rubik's Cube of a movie, and while I didn't love it, I appreciated the hell out of this thing. If it sounds like you at all, then you've missed out. Go watch it. I honestly don't know how to warn you to stay away from it more if you don't like super, super weird stuff. Jesse Plemons is one of my favorite actors working today, and not only was he in I'm Thinking of Ending Things, he's also got a small role in my next pick, The Master. Now, even though this movie is very, very strange, I would not call it Paul Thomas Anderson's weirdest movie. It's kind of middle of the pack for him. But what is so strange about this one is Joaquin Phoenix's really intense performance. Like everybody, I thought he did a fantastic job in Joker. He's doing similar work here. I mean, it's a different character, but man, is he on another level in this movie. Additionally, this is essentially about the creation of Scientology. Names are changed and everything, but you're also getting this incredibly metaphorical relationship between Joaquin Phoenix's character and Philip Seymour Hoffman's. It really just is fantastic stuff because you can watch this two different ways. You can watch it just looking at the two of them, their performances, their relationship, what it means and what it represents, or you can just watch it as this very interesting representation of the birth of Scientology. Now, in a list full of movies that are quote-unquote not for everyone, my next pick is easily the most accessible one. It's the one that I would recommend almost anybody watching this movie watch because it is incredibly fun, lighthearted, and is probably going to leave you in the best mood out of anything on this list, and that is Safety Not Guaranteed. This movie's already got some years on it, but it still feels really fresh to me because I remember seeing it in the theater originally. It made for a fantastic date night movie, and it just felt so fresh at the time that it still somehow feels fresh to me today. In this movie, Aubrey Plaza plays a journalist who is investigating a really strange character played by Mark Duplass who claims to have access to a time machine. You also get little side adventures with some of the other characters in this movie, and again, just a good, lighthearted movie about some strange characters that is ultimately just really good-natured and positive. I highly recommend this one. That said, getting back to movies that are not for everybody, A Monster Calls is a movie about a young boy and his imaginary friend, which is a giant root monster that resembles Groot. Now, this is actually based on a book by the same name, and what this movie is ultimately about is a young boy dealing with his mother dying of cancer. And that is a spoiler that is somewhat necessary. I don't want anybody going into this one and getting really upset by this movie because it is a downer of a movie. However, you've got fantastic performances from everybody on screen, including one from Liam Neeson, who's voicing the monster. It's dazzling visual effects. This is easily one of the most beautiful movies on Netflix right now, and one of the most kind of heartfelt and touching movies. However, it's extremely heavy. If you feel like it might be a little bit too much for you or a little too upsetting, It will be. You may not want to watch this movie, and if you do, you at least want to make sure you're in the right mood for it. So here we are at number 5 with another Danny McBride pick, and it's one of the better Netflix originals to have come out recently, and one of the better family movies of the year so far, The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Now this is actually done by Sony Animation Studios, who did Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and a bunch of really fun movies, and it was originally slated for theaters before the pandemic, and then Netflix bought it, and here we are, it's a Netflix original. It's got a really cool style to it that kind of looks hand-drawn and computer animated at the same time, and it's got a good core story about family unity. I know, as cheesy as that sounds, it does come across really well in this. It's fairly sophisticated in Mitchells vs. the Machines. On top of that, though, you just get this wild sort of sci-fi thing where they're fighting robots, and it's this big epic end of the world thing happening as well. Easily fun for the whole family. I've watched it with my 5 and 3-year-old. They love it. It's fun. It's lighthearted, but also has some lessons in there. You know, it's one of those kind of things, but it's one of the better things I think Netflix has put out this year. I was actually surprised at how good this movie actually was. If you have not seen it yet, I cannot recommend it enough as a family watch. So, The Green Knight is one of my more anticipated movies that were delayed from the pandemic. It comes out in just a few weeks. However, its director, David Lowery's best movie, is currently on Netflix. It's called A Ghost Story. In this movie, Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck play a couple, and he dies very early on in the movie and comes back as a ghost. That's the setup. Do not confuse this for being a horror movie. It is not. This one has more in common with the work of Terrence Malick or something like that. If you like his work, I cannot recommend A Ghost Story enough. If you don't generally like those slower art film type things, this may not be for you. However, it is a beautifully done movie. I found it to be incredibly intense as it reached the climax. I had actually put off watching it for a while, even though I was a fan of his work. It just didn't interest me, and I was way wrong. This movie just has some beautiful shots in it, a really compelling story that is told in a very, very simple way. There's not a ton of dialogue in this movie. There's not a lot that is explained to you, but by the end of it, you will understand everything that you have seen on screen. Easily one of the more beautiful, sort of heart-sinking movies currently available on Netflix. If you like that description and you've never seen it, it's going to be one of the top picks off of this list for you. Another family flick, fun enough for everybody, is Paranorman. This one's actually done in stop motion, and it's about a little boy who talks to dead people, kind of like The Sixth Sense. There is some crude humor and quite a bit of discussion of death, so you may want to be careful with very, very young kids on this one, but the animation style is amazing, and it's ultimately a zombie movie, so it's going to be very fun for adults, particularly fans of this channel, and it's not too scary for kids. My 5-year-old loved it. My 3-year-old, I think it might have freaked her out a little too much, so she did not watch it. That gives you a rough idea of what's going on. There are some creepy characters, yet I would put this one sort of in the realm of Nightmare Before Christmas in terms of scare factor. People still shit themselves with laughter over Monty Python and the Holy Grail. However, Monty Python's A Life of Brian, I think, is equally as funny and somehow overlooked. Now, this was a hit movie when it came out, but it is not as legendary as some of Monty Python's other movies, and I think it should be. This is essentially the story of Jesus, except in this movie his name is Brian, and he wants nothing to do with any of it. The concept alone is absolutely hilarious, and I think it's every bit as funny as the Holy Grail. If you've never seen it or it's been a while, and you do like Monty Python's sense of humor, Life of Brian is going to have more laughs in it than anything else currently available on Netflix for you, except for maybe the Holy Grail. So I couldn't not put Shutter Island at number 1. I know it seems like a little bit of a basic choice, but it's easily Martin Scorsese's weirdest movie. He's easily my favorite director, and even though the twist may seem a little basic or familiar, it is delivered in a way that is unlike anything else. There are so many little touches throughout this movie, subtleties in people's performances and the way they hold a piece of paper that you will notice if you're looking for them on a second viewing when you know what's actually going on. In fact, this movie is a very rare case of a second and third viewing being better than the first. That does not happen often. Shutter Island is that type of movie. If you only watched it the once, You definitely need to watch it again. You may even want to remind yourself of what the twist is so that you can be on the lookout for clues, because not only are there clues in every scene, there are clues in almost every single shot of this movie. In terms of a magic trick type of a movie that's hiding things from you in plain sight constantly, Shutter Island is an absolute masterpiece. So that's the list. Let me know what you're looking forward to watching in the comments below. Also, help me thank the Patreon supporters. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link down there where you can become a channel member and get access to exclusive videos right here on YouTube. But I will keep making these Netflix lists as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this weird list, and you will see me on the next one.